Few badges in American performance history carry as much weight as Z06. Since its secretive debut in 1963, the Z06 has stood for the purest, most track-focused expression of what a Corvette can be. While today's performance headlines may belong to the newly unveiled ZR1 and the even more extreme ZR1X, it's the Z06 that redefined what was possible for a naturally aspirated V8. With its flat-plane crank LT6 engine screaming past 8,500 RPM, the Z06 has earned praise not just for its numbers, but for how it delivered them, with character, balance, and precision that rivals some of the world's best exotics. And although it may no longer sit at the top of the Corvette food chain, the Z06 remains the heart and soul of the performance lineup. To understand how it got here, we need to rewind to where it all began. When it first appeared in the 1963 Corvette, the Z06 was a pure race car, built for the track, not for the street. Daily driving one would have been unthinkable. After that initial outing, the Z06 name disappeared for decades, only to return in 2001, this time reimagined as a high-performance street machine. Since then, it's evolved into something more refined, more capable, and in its latest form, the Corvette has grown into a true world-class contender, America's supercar. But where did it all really begin? The truth is, 1963 wasn't the start, it was the result. That first Z06 was the culmination of years of racing, testing, and behind-the-scenes development. A way to distill all of GM's performance know-how into a single, accessible package. That story actually starts almost a decade earlier. Let's take a look. "1953 was the moment when greatness met destiny. 2 years earlier, GM's head of styling, Harley Earl, a visionary designer responsible for futuristic concepts like the Buick Y-Job and the GM LeSabre, had set sights on building something new. Earl was fascinated by European sports cars, and though his jet-age designs weren't exactly aerodynamic, they looked fast, modern, and exciting. His influence on GM's design language was unmistakable. In late 1951, Earl convinced GM to let him build a two-seater American sports car. The result was prototype EX122, secretly dubbed Project Opal. That hand-built concept would go on to become the 1953 Chevrolet Corvette. When it debuted at the GM Motorama at the Waldorf Astoria in New York City on January 17, 1953, the Corvette was an instant sensation. So much so that people were trying to place deposits on the spot. Just 6 months later, on June 30th, production began and the very first Corvettes rolled off the assembly line. But among the admirers at Motorama that day stood a man who would come to define the Corvette's destiny, Zora Arkus Duntov. Maybe it was a coincidence he was there, or maybe it was fate. Either way, Duntov, already a seasoned racing driver, engineer, and entrepreneur, saw something in the Corvette that most others missed: potential. He was impressed by the car's concept, but not its execution. In a bold move, Duntov wrote a letter to Chevrolet's chief engineer, Ed Cole, outlining his thoughts on how to improve it. By May of that year, Chevrolet had hired him as an assistant staff engineer, and from that moment on, the Corvette would never be the same. Duntov's influence was immediate, but the Corvette's future was still uncertain. Despite its beauty, the early models had major flaws. No side windows, no roof, a weak inline-six engine, and a 2-speed transmission. Only 300 units were sold in 1953. The following year brought more colors and slightly higher numbers, but Chevy still had unsold inventory. In 1955, the Corvette got its first V8 engine, a critical step in transforming its image from stylish cruiser to legitimate performance car. Even with the V8 and the new 3-speed gearbox in 1955, the Corvette now faced a new competitor, the Ford Thunderbird, a car that offered everything the Corvette lacked. Sales plummeted. Duntov knew that performance, real track-proven performance, was the Corvette's only hope for survival. Ford was winning on Sunday and selling on Monday. If Chevrolet wanted to compete, the Corvette had to prove itself on the racetrack. Duntov had already made headlines in 1955 during the Daytona Speed Weeks, where he shattered the existing two-way flying mile record by hitting an average speed of 150.583 miles an hour. But even that wasn't enough to convince everyone. Fearing that Chevrolet might pull the plug on the Corvette, Duntov wrote to upper management again. In his letter, he warned against surrendering what little ground they had gained to Ford. The only path forward, he argued, was to evolve the Corvette into a world-class sports car. Surprisingly, management agreed, but they also knew they faced a monumental challenge. How do you convince the world you're building a world-class car when most of the world doesn't even see you as competition? In early 1956, Chevrolet announced that a factory-backed Corvette team would compete in the 12 Hours of Sebring endurance race that March. While Duntov was no doubt thrilled that GM had finally taken his vision seriously, he was equally concerned. Sebring was just over a month away. Yes, he had proven the Corvette's top-end potential by pushing a 56 model to over 150 miles an hour in the flying mile. But Duntov also knew the truth. The Corvette's chassis wasn't yet ready for primetime endurance racing. It needed development, serious development. When he expressed his concerns to Ed Cole, the response was swift, and not what he expected. Duntov was removed as team lead and replaced by accomplished American racer John Fitch. Duntov, now sidelined, was reassigned to oversee spare parts and testing. Ed Cole, meanwhile, took the Flying Mile car and 3 production models and sent them to Smokey Yunick's famed shop in Florida for race prep. As the cars were being built, Fitch began the grueling process of putting a 56 test mule through its paces, exposing every weakness. The brakes were too small and overheated quickly. The suspension allowed excessive body roll through corners. Piece by piece, Fitch and his team worked through the issues, gradually refining the mule into a legitimate race contender. When the Smokey Yunick prepped Corvettes arrived at Sebring, Fitch applied everything he'd learned. He drove the cars hard, pushed them until they failed, identified weaknesses, and strengthened them. The team learned by doing and by breaking things. Back in Detroit, Duntov wasn't idle. Though removed from the front lines, he remained deeply invested in the program. A true leader, he rolled up his sleeves and found ways to contribute. As Fitch fed back data from the track, Duntov responded with redesigned components, better, stronger, and track legal. To keep the cars SCCA compliant, every new part he engineered was cataloged with Chevrolet part numbers. Through this fast-paced cycle of testing, breaking, and improving, a new machine began to emerge, the Corvette SR1. The initials are still debated, Special Racing or Sebring Racer, but what's not in question is the car's impact. Each SR1 featured a heavy-duty suspension, larger fuel tank, and upgraded brakes. The brake system in particular was a leap forward. Bigger drums, special brake shoes made from a ceramic metallic compound known as cerametallic, and new backing plates to improve airflow and reduce fade. Air ducts were added to cool the drums, with scoops up front and dedicated rear ducting as well. The SR1 ran on 15-inch Halbrand wheels, and the windshield was dramatically chopped for better aerodynamics. The Flying Mile car was powered by a hand-built 307 cubic inch V8, complete with dual quads, the now famous Duntov cam, and a 4-speed transmission. The other three cars retained their 265 V8s and 3-speed gearboxes. These would run in the C production class, while the more heavily modified car entered B production, piloted by John Fitch and SCCA Hall of Famer Walt Hanskin. When the dust settled at Sebring, it was Fitch and Hanskin who emerged victorious in B production, finishing 9th overall. That race proved it. The Corvette could compete with the world's best. And just like that, America's sports car had arrived. Chevrolet quickly capitalized on the moment, running ads that proudly declared the 1956 Corvette the real McCoy. It wasn't just marketing hype, it was the beginning of a racing legacy that would define the Corvette for generations. While Team Corvette was busy making its mark in the racing world, Jerry Earl, son of legendary GM designer Harley Earl, was carving out his own path on the track, but not in a Corvette. Jerry was racing a Ferrari, specifically a 1953 Ferrari 250 Vignale. And let's be honest, if you were a racer in 1956 given the choice between a Corvette with little to no racing pedigree or a Ferrari with proven success, you'd likely pick the Italian thoroughbred every time. But when your father is not just a car designer, but the chief designer at General Motors, your choice of race car carries more weight and raises eyebrows. Raise eyebrows it did. Harley Earl wasn't thrilled to see his son in a competitor's car, especially when GM had a new American sports car to promote, so he sat Jerry down and offered a deal. Ditch the Ferrari, and in return, he designed Jerry a one-of-a-kind Corvette built specifically for racing. It was an offer Jerry couldn't refuse. By May of 1956, GM Styling Studio began work on a series of 3 custom-built Corvette racers under the internal code name SR2. One was for Jerry, the other for Harley Earl's protege and assistant Bill Mitchell, and the third for GM President Harlow Curtis. The bodywork of the SR2 is what really set it apart. Though it shared the basic proportions of the production 56 Corvette, nearly every detail was rethought with performance and styling in mind. The front grille was extended and angled downward, likely to improve airflow and aerodynamics. The hood was lengthened to maintain visual balance. Turn signal openings were enlarged and converted into air scoops for cooling the front brakes. Headlights were deleted entirely and replaced with conical covers to streamline the front end. Along the sides, the Corvette's iconic coves were reimagined as functional brake ducts for the rear wheels. The stock windshield was scrapped in favor of twin racing-style plexiglass windscreens. At the rear, a dramatic fin was mounted to the center of the trunk, later replaced by an even larger offset vertical fin molded into a headrest behind the driver. It may have been part styling exercise, part functional aero, or both. Underneath, the SR2 was built on the foundation of the SR1, carrying over all of the hard-earned lessons from Duntov and Team Corvette's earliest foray into racing. It featured the same heavy-duty suspension, large fuel tank, Halbrand wheels, and upgraded brakes. While the SR2s didn't dominate on the track, they served a greater purpose, as rolling test beds and design exercises that helped refine the Corvette's potential. More than anything, they proved that Corvette racing was possible. And for Zora Arkus Duntov, that was just the beginning. With domestic credibility building and engineering knowledge expanding, he set his sights on the biggest stage of them all, the 24 Hours of Le Mans. It's no secret that Zoroarkis Duntov was dreaming of Le Mans from the moment he punched his first-time card at Chevrolet. With the growing success of the SR1 and SR2 programs, it was clear the Corvette wasn't going anywhere. And more importantly, it was starting to be taken seriously. The Corvette name had clawed its way onto the world stage. No longer a novelty, it had earned respect through determination, speed, and grit. But if it was ever going to go toe-to-toe with dominant GT cars like Ferrari, Corvette needed more than a modified street car. It needed a clean sheet race car. And so began Project XP64, the Corvette SS. In the world of 1950s Grand Touring cars, the Europeans had the formula dialed in. Among the best was Mercedes-Benz, and their weapon of choice was the 300 SL, arguably the world's first true supercar. With its tubular space frame, gull-wing doors, and fuel-injected inline six, the 300 SL set the benchmark. In stock form, it made just over 220 horsepower, but in race trim, output climbed closer to 300. The car used a short, long-arm front suspension and a swing axle rear. Not quite fully independent, but impressively close for the era. It was light, balanced, and fast. Duntov took notice. In August 1956, Chevrolet quietly acquired a 300 SL as a benchmark. The Corvette SS chassis would follow the same space frame design philosophy, but with even more aggressive materials. The car featured a lightweight steel tubular frame wrapped in magnesium body panels, shaped for low drag and high speed. Underneath, it rode on a coilover front suspension and a de Dion rear axle with inboard aluminum drum brakes. Under the hood, an all-aluminum 283 small block V8 topped with mechanical ramjet fuel injection in a Duntov spec cam, producing 310 horsepower. Two cars were built, a magnesium-bodied race car and a fiberglass-bodied test mule. Ironically, it was the test mule that received the most development time and track testing. It was better sorted, more dialed in, and ultimately became the benchmark for how the full race car should have performed. But come race day, it was the magnesium car that took the green flag at Sebring in 1957. And unfortunately, it only made it 23 laps before being retired due to overheating and chassis issues. Despite the mechanical failure, the Corvette SS had proven something important. It could run with the best. If Chevrolet could iron out the bugs, it had a real contender for Le Mans. That is, until everything changed. In the 1950s, automakers weren't just building cars, they were building reputations. Racing was a proving ground, and success on the track meant success in the showroom. Win on Sunday, sell on Monday wasn't just a catchphrase, it was a strategy. Manufacturers poured money into motorsports, pushing engineering limits, driver skill, and sometimes the boundaries of safety. And then came the breaking point. In 1955, a horrific crash at Le Mans sent debris into the stands, killing 84 spectators and injuring 120 more. The incident was so catastrophic that Mercedes-Benz withdrew from motorsports entirely and wouldn't return until 1987. 2 years later, tragedy struck again. At the 1957 Virginia 500 in Martinsville, a Mercury driven by Billy Myers crashed through the fence, killing 5 spectators, including an 8-year-old boy. The public outcry was immediate, and the auto industry took notice. Earlier that year, the Automobile Manufacturers Association, or the AMA, had already encouraged its members to reduce their involvement in racing. The Martinsville disaster became the final straw. The Big Three, GM, Ford, and Chrysler, agreed to withdraw all official factory support from motorsports. For Chevrolet, that meant pulling the plug on the Corvette SS program. Le Mans was off the table. The dream was dead, at least for now. The Corvette SS was placed into storage, but not forever. In 1959, it resurfaced for the grand opening of Daytona International Speedway, where Duntov himself took the wheel and set the fastest lap of the day, clocking 155 miles an hour. Not long after, the SS was retired for good and donated to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Museum. The test mule, however, took on a second life. Sold to GM styling VP Bill Mitchell for the grand sum of $1, the mule was rebodied with a dramatic, futuristic design and renamed the Stingray Racer. While it never raced at Le Mans, it did something almost as influential. It became the stylistic blueprint for the upcoming second-generation Corvette. Despite the AMA ban, Mitchell continued racing the Stingray privately in 1959 and 1960, capturing an SCCA National Championship. Today, the Stingray Racer remains in the hands of GM's design studio, a symbol of both what could have been and what was yet to come. The Stingray Racer notwithstanding, Chevrolet was not campaigning any race teams. However, that didn't mean that private Corvette owners stopped racing. They definitely raced. And whether or not the factory was out there with a race team, the reputation of any sports car was built or destroyed on the racetracks. The Corvette wasn't immune, as customer cars found themselves on the circle tracks and road courses on a regular basis. Chevrolet had learned a lot about the Corvette thanks to John Fitch finding the weaknesses on the track and Duntov designing new components and giving them part numbers. With all of the work they did in development over the years, Duntov wanted to make sure that aspiring Corvette racers still had the opportunity to enjoy their cars on the track, and it would be a total shame to let all of that work come to naught. Fortunately, Chevrolet, well, GM, already had a means of keeping that technology alive: the regular production option, or RPO. Contrary to what good old Wikipedia might tell you, RPO codes have been around since the 1950s. Some may refer to them as option codes, but in the end, they still came down to an RPO. These codes were designated for certain options that could be placed when building a new car, from determining what color your car was to speccing out your truck with air conditioning and power seats. Other RPOs served to build specialized cars more suited for racing. RPO codes were very useful back then and are still very useful on today's new GM vehicles, although these days they're more like their own nameplates than individual options. Let's take a brief look at two of these codes, RPO 684 and RPO 687. I'll just be giving a general overview and not diving too deep on all the differences and changes. In 1957, shortly after withdrawing from active racing, Chevrolet introduced RPO 684, the heavy-duty brakes and suspension package. This option was available from 1957 to 1959 model years. During development for Sebring, Team Corvette realized just how crucial the brakes and suspension subs were. The brakes needed constant airflow in order to dissipate the heat they generated on the tracks, and the suspension needed to keep all four tires planted to the ground while limiting body roll in the corners. RPO 684 consisted of larger drum brakes at all four corners that featured 2.5-inch wide front shoes and 2-inch wide rear shoes. The backing plates were opened up and protected with screening to keep debris out while improving airflow. The brake drums themselves were unique with larger fins to also improve heat dissipation. The brake shoes were built with Cerametallics linings. These shoes were so tough they wore out the drums before the shoes needed to be changed. The brake package was rounded out with a pretty complex air ducting system to supply the brakes with an uninterrupted flow of air. The heavy-duty suspension came with heavy-duty shock absorbers, 340-pound front springs from 57-58 and 550 and 59, although it's rumored that it was always 550 from the start. The same with the rear springs. At first, they were rated at 125 pounds from 57-58, and then 145 pounds in 59. But they were probably 145-pound springs from the start. RPO 684 usually promoted the use of RPO 276, wider 15 by 5.5 wheels. The suspension was finished off with a thicker front sway bar and quicker steering. Many of these cars were accompanied by a limited production option or LPO 1625, the 24-gallon fuel tank. In 1960, RPO 684 was discontinued and replaced with RPO 687. A 5/8-inch sway bar was added to the rear suspension, while the heavy-duty front sway bar became standard on 1960 Corvettes, causing the heavy-duty shocks and springs to be dropped. The brake shoe material was changed to a metallic lining that made street braking much better, and centrifugal fans were built inside the brake drums to keep the airflow up. The intricate ducting was greatly reduced. In 1962, the heavy-duty shocks and springs were added back in the RPO. Also in 1962, LPO 1625, the 24-gallon fuel tank, became RPO 488. Thanks to the success of the RPO program, the Corvette name was out there racing and winning on a consistent basis, further bolstering the sports car image. Chevrolet's commitment to performance options like RPO 684 and 687 kept Corvette racing relevant even without factory-backed teams. But as privateer racing intensified, it became clear that some drivers wanted a more complete, race-ready package directly from the factory. That demand led to one of the most significant and secretive RPOs in Corvette history, the 1963 Z06 Special Equipment Package. It was a turning point that marked the transition from incremental upgrades to a purpose-built performance machine offered right off the showroom floor. The 1963 Corvette Stingray was unlike anything Detroit had ever produced. Its sleek, innovative design literally turned heads on the street. Yet it was a car that Zora Arkus Duntov, the engineer behind the Corvette's performance legacy, had mixed feelings about. Duntov was a form follows function guy. Make the car work perfectly, then make it look good. Bill Mitchell, Harley Earl's successor as GM's chief designer, was more function follows form. Here's the shape, now make the technology fit. The two clashed frequently. Duntov believed the Corvette needed to be mid-engine to truly compete on the world stage, but Mitchell wasn't sold on that idea. As chief designer, Mitchell wielded more influence, and design often took priority over engineering. That's not to say Duntov's impact was small. He was instrumental in the four-wheel independent suspension and the introduction of fuel injection. But had he had full control, the Corvette would have looked very different. For a deeper dive on Duntov and the mid-engine Corvette story, click on the link in the upper right corner. Despite these design battles, Duntov kept pushing Corvette performance forward. In 1962, when Ford quietly abandoned the AMA racing ban, Chevrolet gave Duntov permission to develop the Grand Sport, a full-on race version of the '63 Stingray. GM's management quickly shut the program down, but Duntov kept working on it in secret. That's a story for another day. Meanwhile, a new RPO option gave privateers a ready-made race car, the Z06 Special Equipment Package. Not widely advertised, the Z06 was Corvette's most track-focused package yet, packing decades of racing knowledge into one factory option. The focus? Brakes and suspension. Every Z06 came with oversized drum brakes lined with durable ceраmetallic material on all four corners, complete with brake cooling ducts directing airflow through the backing plates. A dual-circuit master cylinder improved safety. The suspension featured heavy-duty springs and shocks, plus a front anti-roll bar 20% larger than stock. Power came from a 360 horsepower L84 fuel-injected 327 cubic inch V8 paired with a close ratio 4-speed manual transmission and a posi traction rear end. Initially, the Z06 included a massive 36.5-gallon fuel tank, though this later became optional. Only 199 Z06 Corvettes were built. The Z06 didn't just look good on paper, it proved itself on the track. The first 3 cars were delivered to racing legend Mickey Thompson and promptly entered in the 1962 Grand Prix at Riverside, where they won. Despite this success, Chevrolet quietly discontinued the Z06 option after the 1963 model year, though all the performance components remained available separately. Over the years, the Corvette continued evolving as both a street and race car. Champions like Dick Goldstrand, Bob Bondurant, and John Greenwood kept Corvette racing at the forefront. While the third-generation Corvette struggled through the 1970s, the brand staged a major comeback in the 1980s and 1990s with the fourth generation. It's truly remarkable to consider that in 1982, a 157 horsepower, 2-barrel carbureted 4-lug Fox body Mustang could be the unexpected spark that reignited the muscle car phenomenon. While iconic names like Z28 and Corvette still existed, they were undeniably struggling. The 1970s OPEC oil crisis and a burgeoning push for cleaner emissions had dealt a near-fatal blow to American automakers. They floundered through the remainder of the decade, grappling with a maze of vacuum hoses, catalytic converters, and feedback carburetors. The muscle cars of the mid to late 70s were often heavy, sluggish, and burdened by a myriad of outdated technologies poorly patched together, just barely limping into the next model year while enthusiasts hoped for a technological breakthrough. It was nothing short of a miracle that Detroit managed to pull itself out of that mire to produce the Neo-era muscle cars, which have since evolved beyond imagination. Frankly, there was no going back. Gone were the days of fire-breathing, big block behemoths that were a chore to drive on the street. In their place emerged more refined machines, often powered by smaller engines, yet delivering a more honest 500 to 800 emissions-acceptable horsepower thanks to sophisticated engine control systems and a smooth idle. These new muscle cars were more aerodynamic, nimble, and surprisingly comfortable. We're talking about amenities like heated seats, surround sound stereos, efficient heating and air conditioning, and power windows. The works. In the midst of this muscle car renaissance, manufacturers did one other thing, and that's take the low-production legendary cars from the 60s and 70s and turn them into brands. These were no longer just optional packages, they became full-blown model lines. The shift occurred because automakers were no longer building race cars simply to sell street cars. The world of racing had fundamentally changed. Modern race cars, driven by safety and practical considerations, were diverging significantly from their street-legal counterparts, and frankly, the street cars suffered for it. Manufacturers needed a compelling reason to bring excitement back into showrooms, and this brings us to 1997 and the introduction of the 5th generation Corvette, the C5. While the C4 Corvette had made significant strides, particularly with the LT4 and the ZR1, the C5 represented a monumental leap forward. Two of the most significant advancements for the C5 were its brand new LS1 engine and the innovative rear-mounted transaxle. The entire car marked a huge step in the right direction. The LS1 was the first true redesign of the iconic small-block Chevy engine since its introduction in 1955. The new chassis, with its nearly 50-50 weight distribution thanks to the transaxle, resulted in an exceptionally balanced car to drive. In 1999, Chevrolet made a serious return to motorsports with the introduction of the C5R racing program. Built by Pratt & Miller and campaigned by Chevy, The C5R competed in the GTS class and quickly proved itself a formidable force. Its dominance was evident through multiple championships in the American Le Mans Series and class wins at prestigious races like Le Mans, Daytona, and Sebring. Also in 1999, Chevrolet introduced the fixed-roof coupe. Essentially a Corvette with a rigid hardtop and a traditional trunk, the fixed-roof coupe was engineered for superior strength and rigidity. This made it the perfect platform for a car that could excel at cornering while remaining stable and composed at high speeds. Chevrolet knew that performance enthusiasts definitely liked the fixed-roof coupe. It showed that there was a market for an American-made car that could give the exotics a run for their money at a fraction of the cost. So in 2001, Chevrolet stepped up their game and reintroduced the world to the Corvette Z06. The popular fixed-roof coupe was made into an all-new package that was a throwback to the original C2. The new Z06 was powered by a new 385 horsepower LS6 engine that breathed through high-flow exhaust manifolds and titanium exhaust, made it to a revised 6-speed manual transaxle. Riding on the also new FE4 suspension, it featured stiffer springs, upgraded shocks, and thicker front and rear sway bars. Believe it or not, the C5 brakes were plenty at the time, so they're standard issue Corvette. The wheels were widened to 9.5 for the front and 10.5 for the rear, and were fitted with larger Goodyear F1 Supercar tires measuring 265/40/17 front and 295/35/18 in the rear for plenty of grip. The entire car was lighter, with a titanium exhaust, lighter battery, lighter wheels, less soundproofing, thinner glass, and even a fixed radio antenna so as not to weigh the car down with the power unit. Aside from the cooler wheels and the Z06 fender emblem, the only way to distinguish it visually from a normal fixed-roof coupe Corvette was the mesh grille up front and a functional side-mounted scoop in the front of the rear wheels for brake cooling that paid homage to the original SR1. The new Z06 was fast, had tons of grip, and despite being panned for cheaper plastic interior components, was still an extremely plush and comfortable interior, at least compared to the original form of the Z06. The 2001 Z06 delivered the goods, and the people wanted more. For 2002, engine horsepower was increased to 405 with an improved air intake, bigger camshaft with heavier springs, and lighter valves in the heads. While the new Z06 was a pure street car, it was still capable of 0.97 Gs on the skid pad, and many of them made their way to the racetracks and road courses across America. They were extremely capable cars and proved themselves over and over again. So capable, in fact, that a 2004 Z06 became one of the first production cars to run the Nürburgring road course in less than 8 minutes with a time of 7 minutes 56 seconds. In 2005 saw the introduction of the 6th generation Corvette, and with each generation, the Corvette becomes more and more of a capable, formidable sports car. While a little over 5 inches shorter than its predecessor, the wheelbase was stretched by 1.2 inches, at the same time having a 1-inch narrower overall track. For the C5, the top-of-the-line engine was the LS6 and produced 405 horsepower. However, the base engine for the C6 was the then new LS2 at 400 horses with 400 pound-feet of torque. In 2008, the base C6 saw a power boost in the form of a new engine, the LS3, that cranked out 430 horsepower and 434 pound-feet of torque. Add the optional vacuum-actuated valve exhaust, and you saw a peak of 436 horses and 438 pound-feet of torque. The suspension layout was pretty much the same as the C5, with the rear-mounted transaxle making for a near 50-50 weight distribution once again. The big news came a little earlier in 2006 as the new Z06 hit the streets. This new Z broke all the rules by dropping their newest engine under the hood, the LS7, a wicked, all-aluminum 427 small block, the largest displacement small block engine ever produced to date. It featured a sleeved aluminum block with forged steel internals and titanium alloy connecting rods mated to hyper-protected pistons. There were also titanium intake valves and sodium-filled exhaust valves with a dry sump oiling system. Sounds like it should be making laps at Le Mans, right? Power output for the LS7 was 505 horsepower and 470 pound-feet of torque, making it the most powerful naturally aspirated engine made by General Motors at the time. The C6 wasn't just a base Corvette with a hot engine. No, this fire breather was its own model line. Built at the same factory as the C6R race car, the Z06 sat on its own aluminum frame versus the steel frame of the average C6. The engine sat in the magnesium alloy cradle. The floors were made out of a balsa wood carbon fiber composite, and the front fenders are carbon fiber, all to save weight. Other weight savings items were reduced sound deadening, no power rear hatch, no power passenger seat, and the battery was mounted in the rear for better weight distribution. A Z06 weighed in at 3,179 pounds versus 3,208 pounds of a normal C6. On the outside, the body of the Z06 sets itself apart with larger wheel openings and wheel flares all the way around, draped over 18 and 19-inch lightweight forged aluminum wheels, front and rear respectively. The front wheels were clothed in large 275/35/18 tires, while the rear was wrapped in massive 325/30/19 tires. Stopping power came from huge 14-inch cross-drilled front brakes with 6-piston calipers, accompanied by 13-inch 4-piston caliper brakes in the rear. The entire suspension was beefed up with larger anti-sway bars and stiffer springs and shocks. The easiest way to spot a Z06 was the center-mounted intake scoop in the front fascia and a front splitter with a larger than normal rear spoiler that went along with the wider rear bodywork. The side also sported a brake scoop right in front of the rear tire, a Z06 standard feature by now. The entire package packed a wallop: 0 to 60 in 3 seconds, a 1098 quarter mile at 123 miles an hour, and a top speed of 198 miles an hour, all for about 70 grand, if you could find a dealer that wouldn't mark it up by an extra 30 grand. To put things in perspective, the top 5 cars in the world in 2006 were the Bugatti Veyron at number 1, number 2 being the Celine S7 twin turbo, the Ferrari F430 at number 3, the Z06 at number 4, and number 5 being the Lamborghini Gallardo Spider. The Corvette was the cheapest on the list at 71 grand, with the next cheapest being the Ferrari at over 200 grand. Needless to say, the Z06 was in good company. It provided comparable performance for a fraction of the price. It definitely made the supercar manufacturers take a second look at things. Some may have just started noticing the Corvette, but it's been competing on the world stage since Sebring 1956. I mentioned earlier that the Z06 was built at the same factory of the C5R race car, and it gleaned direct benefits from it. As I've said before, racing improves the breed, and from the experience of direct competition on the track. So, in 2011, Chevrolet took what they learned and applied it to the Z06 on the street, and came up with RPO Z07, the ultimate performance package. It costs about 10 grand, but customers received so much more. Each Z07 package included the F55 magnetic ride control system for improved handling and Brembo carbon ceramic brakes. Rolling stock was upgraded to ZR1 style wheels wrapped in Michelin Pilot Sport Cup tires. A second option was also added, RPO CFZ, the carbon fiber package. For about 4 grand, owners received more aggressive ground effects that consisted of a larger front splitter, side rockers, and a full-width rear spoiler, all in carbon fiber, of course. This package was enough to allow the Z06 to run the Nürburgring in 7 minutes 22.68 seconds, clearly placing the Z06 and Z07 packages on the radars of every supercar manufacturer. The Corvette began its 7th generation in 2014, and I feel that this chassis was what made Chevrolet realize they've reached the upper limits of its abilities. Don't get me wrong, it was a great chassis, but there was just only so much you can do with a front engine rear drive arrangement, depending on the overall goals of the model line. You see, back in the 1960s and 70s, having a car with 500 horsepower was unheard of on the street. If anyone actually had a street car that made that much power, it was loud and impractical, and sometimes even dangerous to drive. That was because the engines had begun to push the limits of the technology of the times. Over the decades, new technology pretty much evened the playing field, and all of a sudden, a 500 horsepower car was average. They were plenty fast, but the cars were built to handle it. They were even practical, for lack of a better term. They idled smoothly, cruised well at 50 miles an hour, but had no issues ramping it up to 150. For 2014, bearing the revived Stingray name, the styling of the C7 was a big styling departure, but retained performance focus. One big change is that the Z06 isn't produced on its own special frame anymore, because now all C7s are produced on an aluminum frame. Most likely a move to save money, but there is no denying that the new frame was much stronger than before and opened the door to allow the Z06 Coupe to have a removable roof section that wasn't available before. Also, potential Z06 buyers will have the choice of either a coupe or convertible, all thanks to the aforementioned new aluminum frame. The power plant of choice was the all-new LT1. At 6.2 liters, it developed 455 horsepower and 460 pound-feet of torque. The frame and suspension layout and construction was pretty much consistent with the C6 and performed well. The Z06 was introduced in 2015 with lots of hype. The party was under the hood once again. The engineers at Chevy ramped things up with the introduction of the LT4, a 6.2-liter supercharged and intercooled V8 based off of the current LT1 engine. Peak power was a crazy 650 horsepower and 650 pound-feet of torque. Power flows through either a 7-speed Tremec manual or a first ever offered on a Z06 8L90 8-speed automatic transmission with paddle shifters. The suspension is once again beefed up compared to stock C7s. Rolling stock consists of 19x10 wheels up front and 20x12 in the rear, wrapped in Michelin Pilot Super Sport run flat tires measuring 285/30/19 and 335/25/20 front and rear respectively. Brakes received a huge upgrade with 14.6 front rotors and 6 piston calipers and 14.4 rear rotors with 4 piston calipers. The Z06 Performance Package steps it up even more with Michelin Pilot Sport Cup 2 tires, 1-inch larger carbon ceramic brakes, and revised suspension tuning for increased handling. The Z06 brought in 3-second 0-60 times and covers the quarter mile at 10.95 seconds at 127 miles an hour. With a top speed of 198 miles an hour and cornering with the force of 1.2 Gs, all for under 100K. As much as the C6 pushed its way into supercar territory, the C7 did even more so. Since at least 1957, Zora Arkus Duntov envisioned the Corvette's ultimate potential as a mid-engine sports car. It was his guiding vision throughout his career, though Chevrolet's leadership resisted the idea fearing it was too radical a departure for the brand. While Duntov never saw that vision realized in his lifetime, he kept exploring the concept through the Chevrolet Engineering Research Vehicles, or CERV, technological test beds that influenced Corvette's development but never reached production. As each new generation pushed performance higher, it became increasingly clear that the front engine, rear drive layout had physical limits. The laws of physics demanded a mid-engine architecture for the Corvette to truly compete on the world stage. When the time came to design the next generation, Team Corvette started fresh with that exact goal in mind: put the engine in midships, transform the chassis, and uphold the Corvette spirit. The C8 was a clean slate, a total reinvention while staying unmistakably Corvette. The most notable change is the radical new chassis layout that moves the engine behind the driver. Gone are the traditional side rails running front to back. Instead, the aluminum frame features 6 high-pressure extruded aluminum castings known as the Bedford 6 after their manufacturing location in Bedford, Indiana. These castings serve as the core mounting points for the rest of the structure, including cross members and suspension anchors, delivering a frame that's both lighter and significantly stiffer than previous generations. The suspension saw a major overhaul as well. The outdated transverse leaf springs were replaced with a fully independent double wishbone coilover setup at all 4 corners. The shape of the control arms, combined with specifically tuned bushings for each wheel, balances a smooth ride with precision handling and impact absorption. For Z51 performance package cars, manual ride-height adjustment is now possible, a feature made practical by the coilover design. Under the hood, or rather behind the driver, sits the new LT2 V8, a 6.2-liter all-aluminum pushrod engine with an 11.5-to-1 compression ratio. It delivers a potent 495 horses and 470 pound-feet of torque, matched to an 8-speed dual-clutch transmission that sends power efficiently to the rear wheels. Performance-wise, the standard C8 Corvette stakes a serious claim in the sports car world. It clocks an impressive 11.2-second quarter mile and tops out 194 miles an hour. Remarkable numbers for a car with just 500 horsepower. To put it in perspective, the 2021 Shelby GT500 with 760 horsepower runs a tenth slower and maxes out at only 180 miles an hour. The C8 not only outperforms, but does so at a fraction of the cost, setting the stage for the even more extreme Z06 to follow. To truly understand the legacy of the Z06, you have to start with its racing DNA, the C8R. When Chevrolet re-entered top-level sports car racing with the C5R over 20 years ago, they partnered with Pratt & Miller Engineering and Fabrication. 2 decades of racing development have culminated in the 8th generation C8R, a dominant force in IMSA's GT-LM class and FIA's LM GTE series. In 2022, IMSA replaced GT-LM with a Pro division in GT Daytona, but the C8R continued to compete fiercely against rivals like the Ferrari 488, Porsche 911 RSR, Nissan GT-R, and BMW M8, racking up 7 wins and securing the IMSA Sports Car Championship. At the heart of the C8R is the 5.5-liter dual overhead cam flat plane crank LT6 V8 engine. Due to racing regulations, it's limited to around 500 horsepower. While Corvettes have previously sported dual overhead cam engines, like the LT5 and the C4 ZR1, this is the first time the brand has offered a flat plane crank V8, an engineering choice that brings race car performance and a signature high-revving sound to the streets. Why a flat plane? Flat plane crankshafts reduce rotating mass by eliminating heavy counterweights, allowing the engine to rev higher and respond quicker. They also increase horsepower per cubic inch, perfect for a sports car like the Corvette. This design is famously used in cars such as the Shelby GT350, Ferrari F430, Lotus Esprit V8, and McLaren P1, putting the Corvette in rarefied company. Chevrolet's engineer took everything they learned from the C8R and applied it to the street-legal Z06. Unshackled by racing restrictions, the LT6 in the Z06 produces a blistering 670 horsepower at an 8,600 RPM redline and 460 pound-feet of torque. It's the most powerful naturally aspirated V8 ever to be placed in a production car. The engine features the same dry sump lubrication system as the race car and uses a unique intake plenum with individual throttle bodies to maintain peak torque across the rev range. Power is delivered through an 8-speed dual-clutch transmission with a 5.56 final drive ratio. While purists may lament at the lack of a manual gearbox, the dual-clutch setup offers lightning-fast shifts and razor-sharp control, allowing drivers to fully exploit the engine's potential. Visually and mechanically, the Z06 sets itself apart. The front fascia is aggressively designed for maximum airflow to cool the high-performance engine, while the rear sports a distinctive center exit exhaust that funnels the intoxicating engine note right into the cabin. A larger adjustable rear spoiler with a functional wicker bill provides high-speed stability. The wheel and tire package also got serious upgrades. The front wheels grew from 19 by 8.5 to 20 by 10 inches, while the rear wheels jumped from 20 by 11 to massive 21 by 13 inches, wrapped in sticky Michelin Pilot Sport 4S tires, 275/30 front, 345/25 rear. Carbon fiber wheels are available as an option to save unsprung weight and improve handling. Bigger wheels require bigger brakes. 14.6-inch rotors with 6 piston calipers up front and 15-inch rotors with 4 piston calipers in the rear, all part of the FE6 suspension package. This setup also features stiffer springs and magnetic select ride control 4.0 shocks for a perfect balance of comfort and control. For the ultimate track experience, the Z07 Performance Package steps it up with the FE7 suspension, including even stiffer springs and advanced shock tuning. Carbon fiber wheels, carbon ceramic brakes, 15.7 inches in the front, 15.4 inches in the rear, Michelin Sport Cup 2R ZP tires, and an aggressive aero kit with front splitter, dive planes, underbody strakes, and a massive rear wing completed the package. Though Chevrolet hasn't released an official Nürburgring lap time, independent reports suggest the Z07 equipped Z06 can pull impressive 1.22 Gs on the skid pad, placing it firmly in supercar territory. The official quarter-mile time for a standard 8-speed equipped Z06 is 10.6 seconds at 131.6 miles an hour. This is on Michelin Pilot Sport 4S tires. The Z07 Performance Package, which features Michelin Cup 2R ZP tires and additional aerodynamics enhancements, has been reported to achieve a quarter-mile time of 10.8 seconds at 128.2 miles an hour. This slightly slower time is attributed to the additional downforce and grip provided by the Z07 package, which can affect launch dynamics. The Z06 is offered as both a coupe and convertible, proving it's not just a stripped-down track tool, but a versatile performance machine ready for daily driving or race weekends. Customization options abound, from wheel finishes to interior trims, allowing owners to tailor their Z06 to their personality. Current MSRP ranges from $112,100 for a 1LZ coupe to a little over $132,000 for a 3LZ convertible. Still an incredible value compared to supercar competitors like Porsche, Ferrari, Lamborghini, or McLaren, which often start well above $200,000. As usual, some dealers may mark up the price, but savvy buyers can find fair deals. The allure of the Z06 remains the unparalleled performance-to-price ratio that has defined the Corvette for generations. The C8 Corvette Z06 has been exceptionally well received by critics and enthusiasts alike, widely praised for offering true supercar performance at a fraction of the cost. With a naturally aspirated 670 horsepower flat-plane crank V8, the Z06 offers 2.60 to 60 times, pulls up to 1.16 Gs on the skid pad, and stops from 60 to 0 miles an hour in just 95 feet, all while retaining everyday comfort and practicality. It's been compared favorably to the likes of the Porsche 911 GT3, Ferrari 458, and even the McLaren 765 LT, often matching or beating their performance while costing tens or even hundreds of $1,000s less. The Z06's precision handling, dramatic sound, and cutting-edge engineering, borrowing heavily from its C8R racing sibling, have earned it awards like Motor Trend's 2023 Performance Car of the Year and near universal acclaim as one of the greatest performance values in modern automotive history. While cars like the GT3 may still edge it out in steering feel or brand cachet, the Z06 is widely considered a game changer that redefines what American performance cars can be. The Z06 has long stood as the heartbeat of Corvette performance, a perfect blend of street-ready usability and track-capable ferocity. But the story doesn't stop there. Chevrolet continues to push boundaries with the ZR1, the most powerful and technologically advanced Corvette ever produced, packaging even more muscle, aerodynamics, and exotic materials that blur the lines between American muscle and supercar sophistication. And with the recent arrival of the ZR1X Track Focus package, Corvette proves once again that it's not just about straight-line speed. It's about precision, balance, and dominating every corner. From Zora Arkus Duntov's early vision of a mid-engine Corvette to the technological marvels of today's C8 lineup, Chevrolet has relentlessly pursued the perfect balance of performance, innovation, and value. Whether you're drawn to the raw, naturally aspirated fury of the Z06 or the extreme capabilities of the ZR1, the Corvette remains a symbol of accessible excellence, delivering supercar thrills without the supercar price tag. And while the Z06 continues to be the ultimate expression of Corvette's naturally aspirated and mid-engine performance lineage, Chevrolet is already charting bold new territory. The introduction of the Corvette E-Ray, the brand's first hybrid supercar, merges electrification with racing DNA in a way that promises to redefine the future. That fascinating evolution deserves a video all its own, so you just might see that next chapter in Corvette's remarkable story on this channel. As Corvette continues to evolve, one thing remains certain. It's a car built not just to compete, but to lead. Whether on the street or the track, or in the hearts of enthusiasts worldwide, the Corvette legacy is alive and roaring stronger than ever.